Here's a provocative question. If I asked you about the most important marketing and growth numbers in your MSP, would you A, know what those numbers should be, and B, know what the specific numbers are right now? Well, this is really important because the MSPs who know where they're going can track their progress on the way. And my special guest today is an expert at this. He works with loads of MSPs, helping them understand which marketing numbers they should be tracking and then focusing on the things that move the needle. Trust me, you are going to get so much out of this interview.
Hi, I'm Brian Hoppe, and I am a strategic coach for MSPs.
And it's so cool to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for coming back on, Brian, because you and I actually met in real life. It was nearly a year ago. It was September last year. We were both at ScaleCon in Las Vegas. And obviously, you're like 2 foot taller than me, because everybody I meet in the channel, I'm only 5'7", and everyone, the first thing they say to me is that as they're looking down at me is, wow, you're a lot shorter than you look on video. But it was really cool to meet you. And we had a really good in-depth conversation. There was you, me, and some of the other speakers sort of locked away in one of the rooms, and I that was one of my favorite parts of that, was just having those in-depth conversations with people I've admired from afar who I've never had the chance to sit and talk with. That's why I wanted to get you back on the show, and particularly today I want to talk about running your MSP by the numbers. And we're going to talk today about what those numbers are, how you collect that information, how you use that information. Particularly as well, I want to talk about what numbers you should ignore, because I'm conscious that MSPs, by the very fact that they can collect 1,000 numbers, will collect 1,000 numbers. And I think you and I would be in agreement that that's not necessarily the right route to go. So first of all, before we talk about the numbers, let's hear about you. So just for those who've never sort of come across you before, or they're not familiar with your work, just tell us what you do with MSPs. Because I know you're working with a growing number of MSPs every single year. So tell us, what do you do to help these MSPs?
Yeah, right. So I do 3 main things, and they kind of go back to the 3 things that I felt were the things that made me the most successful in my MSP. So, the first thing that I think about is peer groups. Joining a peer group was a huge thing for me and for my business, and so I actually facilitate and lead a few different peer groups in the space. The second thing that I thought was just a huge thing for our growth was implementing a business operating system. And so I do that as well. I work with some MSPs implementing business operating systems, think something like EOS or scaling up, those kind of things. And then third thing, huge thing just for my personal growth as well as the growth of our business was that we hired an executive coach. And for me, it was so life-changing that even, when I first started doing it, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this one day. And, 10 years plus later, here I am. So, and that's probably the majority of the work that I do is working one-on-one with MSP owners, just really to help them grow themselves and to grow their business. Because one of the things that I believe is that your business can't grow past your level of growth as an individual. And so, and as a leader. So yeah, those are the 3 big things that I do in the space. And, at any given time, I'm working with 50 to 60 MSPs in those different capacities. And it's just a blast. It's like, it's living the dream, like I like to say.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm such a big fan of peer groups and one-to-one coaching. I think every MSP should be in a peer group or be coached. And I genuinely mean that. There are so many great peer groups around. You run some here in the UK, Ian Luckett and Stuart Warwick, they run the MSP Growth Hub, which is very highly respected. There's lots of vendors, aren't there, that have peer groups. There's so many peer groups around. And yet, I don't know if do you know what percentage of MSPs are coached or in peer groups? It's got to be like a single digit, right?
It's got to be small. I don't have any data on that that I know of, but it is relatively small compared to the population. And by the same token, there are, like you said, tons of different peer group organizations and all of that. So it is easy to get plugged in. I just think that most owners are kind of have that go it alone mentality. It's that entrepreneurship and all of that, but nobody ever made it all on their own, right? You got to have help, you got to have support, and that really well.
Exactly. Well, I can tell when I'm talking to an MSP that's in our MSP Marketing Edge, I can tell when they're being externally coached or mentored. Or in a peer group, it's the quality of the conversation, because there's just a certain element of jumping past the problems, the small things that hold you back, or the mindset issues, and that can be MSPs everywhere, dealing with all sorts of different issues. It's almost like you come at it from a different angle. And that's because you've got the perspective of working with people to help you see it as it actually is. As you say, going it alone, I think running a business and owning a business is the loneliest thing in the world. And we all of us, I've been doing this 20 years, you've been doing this a little bit longer, I think. We all of us think we're brilliant and think we can do it on our own. And then we forget the dark evenings or the 4 a.m.s where we're lying awake in bed. And primarily that's because we think we're getting enough support from our spouse or our staff, but we're not. We absolutely need people who understand where we are. Anyway, massive plug for peer groups and coaching over. Let's talk about running the business by the numbers. So when you talk about running a business by the numbers, are we talking about marketing numbers? Are we talking about financial numbers? Are we talking about ticket numbers? What kind of numbers do we mean?
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of numbers, right? So you've got kind of your metrics and all of those areas that you're talking about. I mean, you've got your marketing metrics and operational metrics with tickets and all that kind of stuff. Mostly what I'm thinking about in the context of this conversation is the financial numbers, right? And knowing your numbers very well is one of the key foundational pieces, in my opinion, to success. Right? Finance is the language of business, and if you don't know your numbers really well from a financial perspective, you're kind of flying blind. And I have conversations with dozens of MSPs. And most of them that I talk to can't tell me key financial metrics about their business that everybody should know. And so I'm a huge proponent of actually, teaching people, hey, here's how to actually track your numbers, your financials correctly. Here's how to set up your chart of accounts so that you can actually really tell what your numbers are. And learning that kind of stuff myself was a huge a leap. I can't overemphasize how much better the business got when I really started to understand the numbers and dig into them and actually know which changes to make the business perform better.
Yeah. So let's talk about specifically which numbers you should be on top of. And then as a follow-up to that, let's talk about how you keep on track of those numbers. And we can get down to levels of what kind of software you should or shouldn't be using. And I appreciate that every MSP has a different software approach to it. But let's talk about which numbers. So, sales, I'm guessing, or sales revenue or monthly recurring revenue are the two most obvious ones. But what are the figures that you would insist that every MSP knows?
Right. Yeah. So we have to start somewhere, right? And starting, if you kind of look at a financial statement, right, you start at the top and go to the bottom. First thing you're going to see is revenue. Okay, so what do we track as far as revenue goes? If you talk to 100 different MSPs or look at their books, then most of them, you're going to see it 100 different ways. How do they track what, right? So what's key in tracking revenue is that you have to separate out your product resell type stuff. That includes hardware, that includes software. But then you've also got to separate out your cloud resale stuff, right? The stuff that you sell that's recurring. It's a different type of revenue than just like one-time hardware software sales, right? But a lot of times you see that all lumped in together. Mm-hmm. Like it's just we resold stuff, right? So actually separating out the stuff that you resell, that you buy from somebody else and sell to your clients, is really important. And then you get down into labor, right? So labor should be separated into at least 3 key categories. So first, we're thinking about, okay, what are the things that we still, I guess first and foremost for MSPs is going to be, what is your managed services recurring revenue, right? So there needs to be a bucket for that. And it needs to be separate from 2 other key pieces, which are going to be technical services revenue, which would be like break fix, if you happen to, or you have overages or emergency, just stuff you're charging by the hour for. And then the third key category would be project, or things that you're billing, that you're quoting a fixed fee for to the client. They sign a quote, you do the project, that kind of a thing. So really getting even just your revenue line items in order can be a difficult task if you're not used to tracking it that way. If you don't have your PSA set up to integrate to your to your financial package, whether that's QuickBooks or Xero or any of the others. It's that can be a big challenge for people to really understand. Okay, how do I need to be able to look at my revenue in order to track the things that are most important?
And splitting those out, is that about making sure that you're on top of margins? Because you talk about like reselling a cloud thing it's kind of easy, but maybe the margins are low. Maybe there's only a couple of dollars per user per month. Whereas a project, for example, might seem like it's a lot of hassle. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of work. I've got to have boots on the ground. But there might be $20,000 of margin in there, or it might unlock new monthly recurring revenue services which are 100% margin. Is that kind of clarity of, are we making money on every single thing here, and how much money are we making? Is that the kind of level that we're talking about?
Yeah. That's the first step in exactly what you're talking about, in getting that level of clarity by line of business, right? So if you're not tracking those things separately, then you're also not going to be able to track your cost for those separately, which is kind of the next thing below revenue is your cost of goods. And if you're not tracking the cost of goods also by line of business, then you're not going to be able to tell how much margin you're making as a whole on your financial statement, and you're not going to know which levers to pull to actually make things better.
Simple as that. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So, and then presumably that goes down then to other costs. So, the cost of premises, the cost of, I guess, utilities, all of that kind of stuff. So I can see here that, do you find that for many MSPs that what seems obvious is actually quite difficult to achieve, because the nature of starting the business and just being in the hustle, isn't it? It's the hustle of just going to get business, selling, delivering. And you look up and it's been 5 years and you're doing 30, 40,000 a month, but you've kind of got no idea of what that 30, 40,000 a month is made up of. Is that typically what you see has happened?
It is, yeah. That is typical of what I see, and that's kind of brings me to the next. As we think about our revenue and then our cost of goods, like, we want to make sure that we understand what actually cost of goods are, and this is another big thing that that most MSP owners don't understand. And when they're thinking about this, they'll realize, okay, what's my biggest cost as an MSP? People. Right. So, and then what I usually see is that there's one line that's somewhere down near the bottom that's like salaries, and it's all the salaries that we pay everybody. Well, guess what? In a service business, your technicians, the people who actually deliver the service, are a cost of goods sold. And that's one of the biggest errors that I see in finance, in MSP finances, is that it's just lumped all in one category down somewhere in the SG&A expenses. We got to move that up into cost of goods so that we can actually understand our gross margin, right? If you're not doing that, you're really flying blind, because you can't tell, okay, what is it actually costing me to deliver the service that I'm delivering? And usually that's where most profitability problems are inside MSPs.
Yeah. So they don't understand where the costs are, and therefore at the end of the month or at the end of the year, they look at it and say, well, there's no profit. Why? Where did that profit go? Mm-hmm. I guess what you're talking about there is making it very obvious and it's there on the sheet. Let's talk about tracking. Let's talk about systems and software. So here in the UK, businesses use Xero, XERO, a lot. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's as prevalent in the US. I'll be honest, it's not the best piece of software. I really struggle with it. And yet that replaced Sage. I'm sure you remember Sage. Sage was just everyone, well, apart from MSPs who perhaps would have sold huge Sage servers in the past, every ordinary business person who's not an accountant hates Sage. I remember sitting almost in tears one night, just desperately trying to, like 15 years ago, trying to get basic information out of Sage, and I just couldn't do it because it was designed for accountants, not humans. Right. What are we talking here about? Does it matter what software you're using, or is this simply a case of saying, right, the information is sat there somewhere, we've just got to organize it in the right way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's probably the latter. It probably doesn't matter as much whether it's Xero or here in the US, it's QuickBooks Online. Most everybody's using that now. We've still got, there's still plenty of people who are using the desktop version. And then you've got other, Microsoft Dynamics, or larger companies might be using something like a Sage Intacct or those kind of things. I think one of the most important things is, do you have your chart of accounts set up correctly to actually get the numbers that you need to get out of it? And B, the next thing would be how easy is it for information to flow from where you bill to your financials, right? Many people bill out of their PSA, so out of your ConnectWise or Halo or Autotask or that kind of a thing. And do you have it set up correctly to go into the correct places in your financial software of choice? And is there integration between those two things and all that kind of a thing? So it's always easier when you can, the more that you can automate of that process.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's 2025 and all of that information is there, and we've got relatively sophisticated software packages, and yet still we're in a position where something as simple as if you're billing out of your PSA, which is convenient and it's the right thing to do because the PSA is where everything happens, but that information doesn't, even with Zapier and all sorts of integrations, that information doesn't necessarily make it into your QuickBooks Online or whatever is the case. So the final question for you along those lines then, Brian, is do you find that MSPs struggle mostly with that, how do I actually do that? Or is it normally a case of once they understand the concepts of what they should be doing and why, for the reasons you've just told us, is the actual implementation of it quite simple?
Yeah, well, I would say it's simple for those who understand how it's to be done, right? There's dozens of people out there who can help you set up the integration appropriately and all of those kinds of things. What I will say is that it's most of the time the knowledge of what to look at and what to look out for that's the biggest hamper for profitability for MSPs. There's data out there. Service leadership, for instance, runs benchmarking and all of that kind of stuff. And in any room of 100 MSPs, you're going to find that there's the 25% top performers. There's those 50% kind of in the middle, and there's 25% at the bottom. The top performers generate on average about 2.3 times as much profit as somebody right in the middle. And what's the difference between those average performers and those high performers? It's really just the skill and the knowledge of the owner or the management team and their ability to generate those profits. And so actually the good thing is that all of those skills are learnable, right? I started out not knowing any of those skills 15 years ago, and went from there to building a successful business and exiting. So those skills are learnable, which is great. And so it's all about getting that knowledge of what to look at and why and how to actually make changes to actually to make your business perform the way you want it to perform.
You can see why running an MSP can sometimes be so frustrating, because when you start, you think it's about support and customer service and tech, right? Being good at tech. And then as you become mature as a business owner, you realize, everything you've just said there, I know that someone's going to listen to this on the podcast or watch this on YouTube and their brain is literally exploding. It's squirting out their ears right now, because what you've just said is a missing piece of the jigsaw of why have we got so much money coming in and so much, and yet there's nothing left, and you perhaps just sent someone off down a direction that they wouldn't have thought of. And we as business owners, and it's not just MSPs, it's all business owners, we've got to get really good at finance. We've got to get really good at marketing. We've got to get really good at sales. We've got to get really good at all of these other areas, which are never about the thing that we got into it. But as you say, that's the difference between being, one of the bottom or the middle MSPs and being in that 25% club, which you want to be in, because guess what? The people who are making really good money from their business are the ones who stay business owners longer. They're healthier, they're wealthier, they have better lives, they have better relationships, they get divorced less, their kids still talk to them, all of that stuff, because actually there's a balance, and you can't be a business owner for 20, 30, 40 years without that kind of balance. Yeah. Okay, absolutely. So for the MSP who's having that epiphany right now, and then he's going to look at QuickBooks or Xero or whatever they're using and scratching their head and going, obviously you can help them. What's the best way to get in touch with you and scream, Brian, please help me?
Give me a hand. Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn all the time. So Brian Hoppe, you can look me up. We probably have mutual connections if you're in the MSP industry. And that's HOPPE if you're not, if you're not looking at it. And then my website, brianhoppe.com, you can always check me out there and get in touch that way as well.
Paul Green's MSP Marketing Edge.